African Renaissance, what is the definition of that in your mind?
I mean, I think that African Renaissance is maybe a term that is a bit too kind of broad and kind of bandied around too much. But I think that African Renaissance to me means that we are starting to get a local flavour, and our cultures, the diverse cultures that we have in South Africa, are being shown on this television screens through the advertising.
And what was the shift? Where did that shift happen?
It's a difficult
international flavour to more local, a local flavour.
It's a difficult question to answer because I think that it's kind of it's multi sort of tongued. But I think that part of it is globalization. I think that you know, it's meant that a lot of brands are doing international kind of advertising, and that's created a reaction against that, because advertising that is supposed to sort of reach people in a whole lot of different countries doesn't necessarily work for all brands.
That's right.
And so what's happened is that there's been a backlash to that. So I think that's one thing. I think the other is that there's certain clients and ad agencies that are being brave about the brands that they've got. So if you look at something like Nando's, or you look at something, I think that even a brand like Vodacom, I think that they are incredibly good at doing that.
Alton and Jan, Player 23, one of my favorite ads, and that's a good example of a local flavour. But then I guess, as you said, Gary, it's about the brand. If you look at, I always think a good example is Audi. They are, although they shoot locally, it's always a global feel. It's almost like that ad can work anywhere globally. Whereas, for example, a Toyota will localize with a new Buddy ad, for example.
Correct.
So it's a local South African flavor talking to the South Africans. So why do you think the different strategies for different brands? What do they look at?
I think that's a question for a strategist, not for me, really, because that's a hard question for me to answer. I mean, maybe an advertising person is a better person to ask. But if you want my humble opinion on that, I think that it's about the strategy that is in many cases, I think, incorrectly written, because I believe, and I'm passionate about doing local advertising for the local market. So, but you know, it gets back to the globalization question, because I think that some of that work is actually then used in other countries.
What's your take on that, Patrick?
I think, you know, 20 years ago, it wasn't very cool being South African. But now it is pretty cool to be South African. A radical shift did happen, and I also think it was a change in our own attitudes. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, we were a country divided, let alone we had different types of South Africans in South Africa. Whereas now, with everybody being together, there's almost a South African lingo, South African speak, and it is very trendy in a way. And there are less barriers, and that has really helped from a creative perspective to be able to not have to have translations from one commercial translated into many different languages. We're in a very fortunate position where the attitude and the personality that is becoming South African is very universal within the country itself.
I think you've got a point there.
I think a good example of that is, you know, is Aish. You know,
yes,
it's something. It's a word that actually transcends whatever background
also
you have.
Ayoba with the MTN campaign. I mean, that's also another example of taking that. Let's look at other campaigns with a local flavour. The cheetah ad, the VW cheetah ad. Yeah. That's something truly African. And it's a touchy-feely, good, make you feel good kind of ad, isn't it? I don't know if you've seen the latest Garmin ad with the wildebeest.
Yes.
That is also an example of taking something true to our heritage, to our African heritage, and making a beautiful production out of it, I might add.
I mean, I'd like to go back to the example that you gave earlier about Vodacom. I mean, I think that they have really done it very successfully, because, you know, when they have launched particular brands that have a particular niche, it always still feels as though it's got a Vodacom flavour.
Yeah.
And even if it is like a Jan and Elton, which is a very much, you know, it's the rugby market. Yes. It's not necessarily the soccer market, and if there's going to be a soccer ad, I'm sure it's going to have a different flavour.
Of course.
But you know, it still feels South African, and that I think is a great success. And even if you look at their original advertising, it was always poking fun at and having a laugh at South Africanisms, which I think is which is great. It's fantastic. But from a creative perspective, it's not always the work that's going to win international awards.
Sure.
And that, I think, is is one of the things that's always been the creatives have kind of balked at a little bit, because they're not going to get international awards with it. They might get local awards, but not international awards.
But how important is that, Patrick?
I think
to win awards?
I think, talking about the fact that you're writing for a different market, yes, definitely. When I first got into the industry, there was this attitude, but the judges in Cannes won't understand what we're saying, therefore it won't have any relevance to them. And there's a lot of pressure, I think, to be a best of breed type of agency, and agencies get that way through many ways. But from a creative perspective, there's a lot of pressure on doing the most talked about work. But what's really nice to see now is that the rest of the world want to see South African style and a unique South African flavour. In fact, the judges that used to come out to judge the Luries as guests would always, without fail, they would say, what I really missed was your own unique South African flavour that you've got so much of. And it almost took international judges and international ad people to come out and tell us. And only now we're finding that, and it's something that's quite sexy in a way. Even from a style point of view, the Chicken Licken ads, I really like the one with the singing burger. And even from a styling point of view, you weren't sure what trend it was, but it didn't matter. It looked like something out of Crazy Monkey, maybe. But again, it was very South African, and the diverse culture that was thrown together there. So there is a lot more, there's a lot more attitude, I think, now with being South African, and we're seeing it a lot more. Whereas, to cut a long story short, we were very Eurocentric, and now there's a pride developing.
Yeah, I think another thing that's really exciting is the success of District 9. I know that we now talk, that's a feature film, but I think that is a prime example of something that's completely local in terms of the characterization of the people, the language that's spoken, the actors,
absolutely
everything, and it is really done well internationally. So
it's done phenomenally well.
Phenomenally well, not even just well, exactly. And I think that's it's almost as though. For me, it's indicative of international people being able to look at things differently, and understand that actually different countries have got different colloquialisms.